Do you want the lights down a bit? Yes.
Well, the
Let's bring them
person,
down a bit.
I would like to turn them all off.
Yeah,
But the
let's get rid of
person,
them.
the guy who's doing the video wants a little something up here. Yeah, I'm starting with my cartographic work, my mapping work, because if I went back to the pattern decoration, I'd keep you here all night. So I'm starting, I guess, about 1993, and I'm showing a lot of stuff. I'm going to talk fast, and if it seems to lag and be taking too long, somebody should just like wave at me or something. And you can ask me questions after. You can even ask me shout-out questions during it. It doesn't have to be that formal. But now this is so that you can do the video. Okay, so you can see my face. Okay. Now from here this looks very fuzzy to me, but I don't know how it looks back there. Yeah? Okay. So I had been doing I did public art for almost 20 years. I did 16 big public projects, and I burned out, and I really wanted to go back to the studio in this last period. But one of the things was that when I was doing public art, you always start with blueprints and diagrams of the site or of the building. And what I would do when I got them was I would build a small cardboard model and try to imagine myself moving through the space, so that the diagrams were kind of the scaffold, the structure upon which to add my content and add my art. And then it occurred to me that that was something I could bring into my private studio work as well. And that was what happened. And it was kind of a conscious choice. There may have been a map or two in my earlier work, but this was actually the first piece that I did in which I said, this is what I'm doing now. And this piece is called Los Angeles Becoming Mexico City Becoming Los Angeles. And I copied out of an atlas maps of cities where I had lived or spent time, or cities that meant a lot to me. And Los Angeles and Mexico City are two of those places. And what I did, it was 22 by 30 watercolor paper, and this became, a lot of times I start and then I keep adding, so that this grew like a kind of visual narrative horizontally. But originally I copied a map of Mexico City, I copied a map of Los Angeles out of an atlas, and I gridded up the page and copied it box by box, and that's what I always do. And then I was very busy working on a big public art project, and I had to put these away for a year, and I took them out, and all of a sudden I started cutting them up and recombining them and changing them, and this was sort of, I don't know, I don't know if this is the language that other artists use, but when I do a piece that's sort of, I figure things out, I call it the pilot piece, and then other pieces can follow. So that's what this was, and I'm going to walk you through it. Okay, so the section on the left is a 19th century property map of Los Angeles. And at that time, I was reading a book by Mike Davis called City of Quartz about the history of Los Angeles and how it was built on property and real estate and greed, basically. And I often recycle my old work, as a lot of artists do. So I cut up these old lithographs of mine that had trees in them, and I felt like I was planting trees on these different blocks in this old city of Los Angeles. And so that was the first one. And then the next one, this is the map of Mexico City, but I cut out the shape of Los Angeles. I don't know if that makes any sense. But basically, it's a hybrid of the two cities. So the black part is Los Angeles, breaking through and framing the center, which is Mexico City. And what happened was I was flying back and forth to LA. I did 4 public art projects in Southern California during the late 80s, early 90s. And I was always flying back and forth. And sometimes when you fly low, you see cities, and they look like jewelry lit up at night. They look like, streams of light. And so that interested me. And then also, it was the time of the Rodney King riots when Los Angeles went up in flames, and there was all these photographs in the media of the smoke and the flames. And so I painted the the original pieces that I copied out of the atlas had I copied the color that was in the atlas. Over the map of Los Angeles, I painted it black. But anyway, the map of Mexico City, I painted pre-Columbian patterns onto. So that's what you see there. And then the next one, this is two maps of the ancient city of Tenochtitlan upon which the modern city of Mexico City is built. And one is drawn over the other. And coming through the center are death heads, which are a very common image in Mexican art. And then the last one, this is the map of Los Angeles, which is painted out black. And I just leave the freeways and the major arteries as though they're kind of lit at night. And then I have these chunks of, because I've interspersed these two maps, so I have these chunks of Mexico City framing it and breaking through it. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this was that I have a history of, I lived in Los Angeles when I was young, and then I went back there to do all this public work, and I saw the city become much more Mexican. And I was working in East LA, which in many ways feels very much like Mexico City. So this is what I was trying to talk about, of the hybridization and the changes and the flows, and to create a place that doesn't exist, but that talks about places that do exist. So I don't know, I'm going to go on from here. And it kind of looks like a river, but there is no river there. Okay, and then this is the next one I did, and it's called Imperial Cities. It's a little bleached out looking, but anyway, it's, I think, about 5 feet square. And at the same time that I initially copied those cities out of the atlas, these are 4 more of them, Rome, Istanbul, Amsterdam, and Vienna. And these are all former imperial capitals. And I was living in Rome, and you know, every piazza has a triumphal arch or an obelisk, which are symbols of empire. And so this was very much on my mind. So again, these are cut up and interspersed, and none of these are a whole entire cities. They're fragments of cities that have certain things in common. And then in this kind of cross image through the center, a lot of it is collage, again, from my old work and from other things, from found things, and images associated with the history of those 4 cities. So again, I'll walk you through it. So these are copied off of old engravings of the streets of Amsterdam, for instance. And on the lower right-hand corner, what you see in old European maps are there's always these images of the people in their colonies. Okay, so what happens is that Amsterdam and Vienna both are on a ring formation, which was a certain type of European urban design. Amsterdam was canals and Vienna was streets, but they fit into each other perfectly. So what we have is Amsterdam in the center and Vienna on the outskirts. And at first, when people see it, they wouldn't necessarily realize it because the language is very similar. It's German and Dutch, and the formation is similar. But when you get up close, it's not a place that exists. It's a hybrid. And this is Rome and Istanbul. No, excuse me. This is Amsterdam and Vienna again. So what you're seeing here is Vienna in the center and Amsterdam around the outside. And these are all images from old engravings of Rome. Anyway, I'm switching now to another piece.
On that one, how large is the whole piece?
Somewhere between 4 and 5 feet square. I don't remember. It's very detailed. I'm very obsessive. Anyway, this one is much larger, and again, I don't know the dimensions. I think it's, well, each one of these squares is 4 inches square, so that gives you a pretty good sense of the scale. This is another work on paper. All of these are works on paper, and I always use water-based media. But this is, again, a combination of watercolor, acrylic, and collage, and sometimes colored pencil. This is called Calvino's Cities on the Amazon. And it's based on the book Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, which maybe some of you have read. I had read it 20 years before I made this piece, and I'd kept it nearby, and I always wanted to make an artwork out of it. And then later I found out that it's taught in a lot of art and architecture schools, and many people have, it's a very visual book that many people have made projects about it. But anyway, this is called Calvino's Cities on the Amazon. My son was living in South America at the time, and somehow I crossed these two different ideas. And I worked on this. Each one of these squares represents one of the cities, so I have to explain about this book. It's a small book, and each chapter is the description of a city. The plot is that Marco Polo is in the court of Kublai Khan, and his job every night is to tell Kublai Khan a story about is to describe one of the cities in his kingdom, because Marco Polo has traversed the kingdom, and he makes them up. And they're fantasies, though there are elements in them based on real cities. And every one of them is named after a woman, and when you begin to read and read and read it, as I did, they're male fantasies, as is the fantasy of going down the Amazon. So I sort of fused these things. And this piece had a soundtrack. My son read sections that I excerpted from each of these cities, and it's an hour and a half long. And I had the audio tape there whenever I showed it in the gallery, but nobody ever listened to it. But anyway, I'm going to show you some of them. And the rivers are pasted on. And I don't show the boundaries between the countries, so there are many countries in South America that the Amazon crosses. I show the Amazon and its tributaries, not cities or countries. Okay, so moving in on it, this one, I'll just explain a couple of them, the stories. And my explanation of the stories is very crude compared to Calvino's, which is very beautiful and poetic. But this city, Eudoxia, is a city which is, if you go there, it's visually a total chaos. But in the center of the city, there's a municipal museum that houses a carpet, which is that city in its perfect form. This one, Ercelia, so you see the river is glued on, and eventually everything was glued to a large sheet behind, and you wouldn't see those tacks in the wall like when it was photographed. But this city, people charted their relationships by tying strings between the houses. And eventually it would become such a dense web that nobody could move around, so they would abandon it, and they'd go to some other part of that region and build another city, and then tie the strings and abandon it. And so it's seen from a mountain looking down into that region, and there are all these webs everywhere. And this one is the most famous one. The whole essays have been written about it. This is Zobaide, and this is a city. All these different men had the same dream on the same night, and the dream was that they were in an unknown city following a beautiful nude woman with long blonde hair through the streets of the city, and they lose her. And the next morning they all wake up and go to the same place and start trying to build this city. And what they build is a series of traps. And this last one, I can't see it, what is it? Chloe. This is a city in which no one ever talks to anyone else. So when they pass each other in the street, all relationships are in the realm of fantasy. Okay, then this next one. These pieces were done in the late 1990s, 96, 97. I did 2 river pieces, and this is called Mekong in Memory. So this is about the Mekong, which is the largest river in Southeast Asia. It goes up through Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and into China. I went to Vietnam in 1996, I think it was. And I came home and I wanted to make a piece about it. And like other people of my generation, I had a memory bank which was totally about the American war in Vietnam. But I'd gone to a country that was a completely different country in 1996, really a new country. So during the years of the war, many of my friends were making anti-war protest work, and I never did. It wasn't something I could even begin to cope with in those days. But at this point, I wanted to do something about, you know, these big themes, tragedy and rebirth. And I had this artwork rolled up on a shelf in my studio, which was a failure. It was originally a horizontal piece for my pattern and decoration period. And it was a paper collage. It was pieces of etchings that I had done that were cut up and worked. And I pulled it out, but the Mekong had to be vertical, and my ceiling wasn't really high enough. So I created this kind of canopy because the piece is 13 feet long. This is in my studio. And the Mekong is the black lines that are glued over the top, and they go up and across. And it kind of feels like the throne rooms in the palaces in Hawaii I remember visiting. And I made this piece, and I thought it had all this, you know, I thought it had all this beauty and tragedy and everything. But when my friends came to the studio, no one really saw all those things that were in the back of my mind. They just said, well, that's nice, or that's pretty, or something. And that's when I made the side panels, which are paintings on tile of film stills from films that were made during the years of the U.S. war in Vietnam, which I think is 65 to 74, something like that. They're not movies about the war. They were made after, but they're movies that, for people who lived through that period, evoke the conflict and violence of those years. They're mostly Hollywood films, and some of them are European films. But both of this, I had been working in ceramic tile for years, and this is practically the last thing I did in that medium. Both of these panels have heads on the top and feet at the bottom, and they kind of have a body feeling to them. And I'm not going to show you every image, but I'll show you some of them. Anyway, that's moving in on it. And that's moving in on the top. You see it goes up and over the wall. And when I was there, I bought postcards and images, and all of that sort of got woven into it. And these are my ceramic tile pilasters, which is sort of like, for me, bringing us into this. And I also, this has a 7-hour audio tape of me reading a book called The Sorrows of War by Bao Ninh, a writer who was a North Vietnamese soldier during the war. It's a very, very sad book. And again, I had the audio tape there, but nobody ever listened to it. I mean, you're not going to stand in an art gallery and listen to a book for 7 hours. And I originally thought I would edit it, but I wasn't able to, so I just read the whole thing. Anyway, I never did that again. Okay. Now, I'm showing you one or two public artworks, really practically the last ones that I did. This is a Minnesota Percent for Art project. It's in the library of Mankato State University in Minnesota, and color is often there, but you get an idea. You're coming in the front entrance of this library, and this very, very large state university with, I don't know, 30,000 students or something. And I did these bays, and there are 4 bays. I did the first 3. The piece can be seen looking up, and it also can be seen from the mezzanine looking down. And this area has computers and books and places for students to work. And that's the information kiosk, and I left binoculars there so people could see their own streets. The first place you see is Mankato, Minnesota, when you come in. And it's called Around the World on the 44th Parallel. And so there are 4 cities on the 44th Parallel in North America in the first bay, 4 cities on the 44th Parallel in Europe in the second bay, and in Asia in the third bay. And there aren't any other continents on the 44th parallel, which is very northern. So I'm going to show you details of some of them, not all of them. For me, I tried to choose different kinds of cities with different kinds of histories and try to incorporate it into the maps. And it was an odd shape, 4 by 14, 4 by 17 feet, I'm trying to remember. So I would be taking a sliver of the maps of these cities. Okay, so this is the first one you see, which is Mankato, Minnesota, which is hardly a city, but anyway. And there were certain things that I picked up on about that city. First of all, I painted all the letters in gold, and I was working in a ceramics factory in East LA on this piece, and the guy who runs it, Dennis Caffrey, is a ceramics genius. And every time we started a new mural, there are 12 of them, he'd come in and he'd say, what kind of mood do you want? What kind of look do you want? And we'd try all different techniques. And I'd been working in ceramics for 20 years, and these techniques, many of them were new to me. So we had this dotting brush, and these are images from woodland and plains Indians that lived and migrated through Minnesota. And so these are beadwork. These are designs from beadwork of those Native American cultures. And he had this dotting brush, and this is done in China paint, low fire over the top. And these images up here, the circles, he brought in these ceramic decals of boys fishing, a kind of American Norman Rockwell image, and you squeegee them on, and that's how commercial dishes are done. It's kind of like a silkscreen process. You squeegee these decals on, and then when you fire it, they melt in. So we have, it's a big fishing state, Minnesota, so we have all of these boys fishing everywhere. And then also, in the factory, there were all these boxes of, this factory makes high-end tiles that are sold for bathrooms and kitchens. And there were all these boxes of tiles that they couldn't sell because they had been damaged during the earthquake in Los Angeles. And so I took the earthquake-damaged tiles and cut them in 1-inch squares and epoxied them on the surface like tract housing. So now you get a closer view of the boys fishing. And then I cut them up and made these kind of leaf-like shapes out of them. And that's more of the dotting. Okay, this is one more in North America. This is Eugene, Oregon. And this one, I wanted to feel like the Northwest woods. I wanted to feel dense and dark and damp. And again, I'm weaving in the native cultures. And so we use these, again, we use these decals. He had sheets of them that had, they look like different kinds of stones and surfaces, natural surfaces on them. And I cut them in shards, and I kept putting them on top of the tiles, and then we'd fire them and refire them so that it was like layers and layers of looking through them. I wanted that transparency. I wanted like the feeling of the woods. Okay, now we're in Europe, and this is Ravenna. The 44th parallel in Europe goes through southern France and central Italy. Much to my surprise, it's the tilt of the globe, so it doesn't seem so northerly at all. In any case, I wanted in Ravenna to include all the great Byzantine churches, so I took 2 pieces of it, and I wanted the feeling of the mosaics, so I used luster glazes, which are iridescent and metallic, amethyst, gold, copper, and I treated the surface in that kind of way so it would have a flicker to it. And the structure is from those churches, particularly the Church of San Vitale. A lot of different languages here. I just copied the maps. And this is in progress, so it's not grouted. And this is Sarajevo, and when I made this piece, Sarajevo was under siege. And I couldn't believe it. You know, I kind of went around the globe on the 44th parallel. And this one was very important to me, therefore. I knew that the things that I was painting were being destroyed. And I wanted to have motifs that were both Christian and Muslim, which is the two sides that were involved in that conflict. So I'll just show you some things. So this is the kind of imagery that would have been in the mosques in Sarajevo before the war. And this, I wanted this to feel like lace. And one of the things that Dennis introduced to me, he kept bringing in these things which are like techniques from grade school. So we made sponge stamps and cut out sponges and put them on a piece of wood, dipped them in the glaze, and then stamped them. And there's another one I'm not showing that has trees and houses that are stamped out. So these lace patterns are done with this stamping. And that made them soft, which was something that I was interested in. And I was comping. I've never been to Sarajevo, but I had a very bad tourist book that I found somewhere, and everything was printed off register. So I just decided to paint it that way. Now we're in Asia, excuse me. This is Sapporo, Japan. And the map I had of Sapporo, Japan was not a street map, it was a transit map. So all those lines are different bus and train lines. And it's a ski resort in the wintertime. It's in the northern island of Japan. And so we airbrushed it so that it would be a really slick yellow. And I wanted to treat it as a more modern city than some of the others. But then I dropped on it like fragments of traditional Japanese ceramics and textiles. So, and then again, we worked on a different technique. I don't know who does ceramics here, if you want to hear about all these ceramics techniques, but when I look at them, that's what I remember. And what we did was we had this liquid mask from a hardware store, and I painted the pattern on it, and then I put the glaze over it and pulled the mask up, so it has this kind of look like batik. And then I experimented with these really, these glazes for hobbyists that, you pour them on and you don't know what they're going to do. And this is Changchun, China, which is northwestern China. It's a big industrial city. I read in the guidebook where I got the map that it was the film capital of China. And that area over there on the left is where the film studios are. And Dennis came in one day with these molds where you pour liquid clay, you pour slip in, and it sits up, and then you take it out and you get a bunny out of it or chicken. And so we made pagodas, carp, and bumblebees. And we made a whole lot of them, and then I luster glazed them, and we put them on the surface. So the pagodas are clustered around the movie theater, the movie sets. And that's the carp. And the imagery doesn't really come from Changchun. It comes from palaces and temples throughout China, really. What happened in this series, as often happens with me and my work, is as I go along, it gets richer and denser rather than the way I was taught it would happen. So you see the pagodas there. And that's one of those glazes that I poured. Okay, now I'm going back into the studio. I did these 3 paintings on canvas in 1997, and I hadn't painted on canvas for 20 years. I'd been working in all sorts of other media. In fact, this was a canvas I had stretched 20 years earlier that had just been sitting there making me feel guilty. This is called Bodies of Water, and it's, I think, 80 inches by 80 inches. And it's a combination of acrylic on canvas and collage. And what it is I had been visiting with a friend of mine who has a sailboat in Stockholm, and we sailed in all around that area where there's 30,000 small islands. And it was the summertime when it was light all night long. And I noticed that he was navigating with these navigational charts, which I'd never seen before, but you have to use them because you hit a rock or something otherwise. And they're beautiful. So when I came back to New York, I went in the Yellow Pages and found out where to get them. So I did these three paintings. I think I'm showing you two of them, based on these navigational charts. I didn't put in the names of the islands. They're very obscure and they're very small, but all the notations for sailing are there. And then on the top of it, I go to a chiropractor, and she had these big, you've probably seen them in doctor's offices, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, these big, I call them maps of the human body. And I asked her where she got them, and she said she ordered them from a catalog. So I ordered them, and I'd had them in my studio for maybe 5 or 6 years. Didn't know what to do with them. And then suddenly I started cutting them up and laying them across the Baltic Sea. And this is 5 or 6 dismembered bodies floating on the Baltic Sea. So it's just moving you in closer to it. And this one, this is called Bodies of Water Songlines. And this is the third and last book, painting based on a book. And I never before, since that period, made art that related to literature. But again, these are islands in the Baltic Sea with all the notations. And I had read this book around that time called Songlines by Bruce Chatwin, which is about traveling in Australia. And he's a wonderful travel writer, and like halfway through the book, he leaves his narrative, and for about 50 pages has these very, very short quotes, 1 or 2 lines, from people across time all over the world, but they're all about, and some very famous people and some completely unknown people, they're all about the impulse to become nomadic and leave home. And it's tied into his narrative about the songlines, because traditionally the indigenous people in Australia leave home when they're, I don't know, about 12, 13, and go walkabout, go out and walk, and they follow the lines, the song lines in the earth, which are the lines of their ancestors. So anyway, that whole thing was sort of the idea behind this painting. And those are the quotes. And okay, now this is another series. This series is called Knowledge, and I'm going to show you a lot of them, but I'm going to flip through it very fast. These are frescoes, and they're all 8 by 10 inches. In the summer of '98, I taught at Skowhegan, and it's one of the few places in this country where fresco is taught, and it's something that I always wanted to learn. So I sort of became the student of the fresco teacher, whose name is Daniel Bozhkov, and he's actually a very avant-garde performance artist. But anyway, he learned fresco in the academy in Bulgaria, and he teaches it, and he's wonderful. So he teaches fresco on 8 by 10 inch panels because it's very hard to control more than a small area. And I ended up making 72 of them, and I never got any bigger than the 8 by 10 inches. But so the series, they're all of these little frescoes, and they're all maps that are wrong. It's called Knowledge. And the reason I started doing it was I had gone to a show at Japan Society in New York, which was European maps of Japan from the 16th to the 19th century. And there were a huge number of them, and everyone was different and everyone was wrong. And I started chuckling, and I brought the catalog with me to Skowhegan. And I started copying them on these little fresco panels. And then after a while, I realized that if the early cartographers had gotten Japan wrong, they probably got everything else wrong too. So then I started looking at old maps. And I haven't stopped looking at old maps since. But so I'm going to walk you through these. So these are way overblown. These are very small objects. The first couple are maps of the world. And it really wasn't until maybe the 16th century that it became codified that the northern hemispheres are on top and the southern are on the bottom. This is a very early map. This is a Greek map, actually, a Roman map. And so when I showed them clustered by continents and parts of the world. So when you walk around the gallery, it's sort of like moving around the world. And all the early maps of the North and South Pole were made before anyone had ever been to the North and South Pole. So they're just completely invented, like this one and that one. And now I'm going to show you some of these maps of Japan, and they're just a couple, but these were the first ones that I made, and in a lot of those early maps, Korea is shown as an island, and in this one, Japan is shown as part of the mainland. So they really didn't know; they just made it up. This is China. This is a Korean map of China. A lot of these maps are all European maps from the Age of Discovery, which is what we call the Renaissance, because that was the great age of cartography. And on all the boats that went around the world and colonized the rest of the world from Europe, there was always a cartographer who would make these drawings and elaborate on them, bring them back to Europe. Engravings were made. They were widely distributed. They were copied from one language to another. The mistakes were repeated and compounded. And if you start looking at the history of cartography like I did, I mean, it's very interesting to see how these things move around. But I was very happy when I found interesting maps that were from other parts of the world with other kinds of conventions. This is a Chinese map of China. And this map of China was done by an Italian Jesuit priest, and he made it look like Italy. And now we're in the Middle East, and many early maps of the Middle East were Crusader maps, and Jerusalem is always at the center. It's always sort of the goal. That's Jerusalem at the center. And then also in these early maps, you see these attempts to fit land formations into mythological creatures. That's Asia Minor in the form of Pegasus. And now this is the Nile River. And we're going to see two different versions of it. This is like a Greek version, and this is an Arabic version. So it's just very different stylizations and conventions. This is Africa. And the other thing that happened in those early maps was they didn't know about proportion. Maybe if they went around a landmass in a ship, they got the outside shape, but they didn't know how far it was compared to other places or how big it was compared to other places. And so you get these strange things. And the other thing that you get is you get these flags all over, particularly on South America and Asia, South America and Africa. And the flags represent the European countries that are claiming those territories. This was in all my mapping books, and it was supposed to be one of the earliest maps. It was supposed to be a Viking map, but I've now read that it's a fake. In any case, if you turn your head, that's Labrador, Greenland, Iceland, and over here you have Scandinavia and the British Isles. And this is an Arabic map of the British Isles. And this is an early map of North America, in which California is an island. And then I'm going to show you a bunch of wildly different maps of South America. That's with all the flags. This was a map was made by the Spanish conquistadors in Mexico, with showing their perspective of what they saw when they came through and conquered Mexico. And this is two together. I did a couple like that. And then I took the knowledge series into 3 dimensions, and I made these globes. And I made 6 knowledge globes. And I bought these the smallest size globes from Rand McNally after Christmas on sale. And the first couple I plastered, and I painted them dry with watercolor and acrylic because I didn't think I could do fresco on a curved surface because fresco is moist. And then after I did the first 3, I said to myself, well, why does it have to be plaster at all? So the last 3, I just gessoed them and painted them. But the first 3 are very heavy and clunky because they're covered with plaster. But in any case, this is a famous medieval map, an English map called the Hereford map. And it's 1200 something. And it's not at all accurate. It's got all these Bible stories in it. And again, Jerusalem is at the center. It's very interesting. And this one is a Jesuit map in Chinese by a Jesuit priest in China, 1600. And this one is a famous Roman map, which is really, really thin and long. And if you see it in books, you have to keep turning the pages. And it's a map of the roads that lead to Rome, of the Roman Empire. So I just wrapped it around the globe and kept wrapping it around the globe. But Rome is in the center. Okay, now this piece, I was making these little globes. I'm not a sculptor. Everything I make is two-dimensional. But I had this idea of making a big globe that you would walk into. And I was at the American Academy in Rome for a year. This is 99-2000. And I ended up making a 3-meter, which is like 9 feet, globe that you could enter. And this is the information that's in it in a visual form. These are aerial maps of all the places in the world that the U.S. bombed between 1945 and 2000 when I finished the piece. And that's the piece. And 3-4 people can go into it. And one of the surprising things that happened that I didn't expect was that if the people inside talk to each other, the sound is amplified and there's an echo. Some people get scared. And the last piece is the door. It slides in and out. I'll show it to you. So when you're inside, you're completely inside. It was built by a couple in Rome who are carpenters in sections, and we kept putting it together as we went along, and I painted section by section. It's acrylic on canvas that's glued onto the inside surface of it. So that's the view from the inside. It's very well constructed. It's almost like a kit. It can be put together in 2 or 3 hours, screwed together. And these aerial maps are of all these different places, and I didn't paint it in one continuous color palette because it's not the whole world. These are isolated places that suffered the same trauma of aerial bombardment. And I ordered these maps from the U.S. government agency called NOAA, called Tactical Pilotage Charts. Anyone who flies a plane has to use those, just like the sailors have to use the nautical charts. And they have information about no-fly zones and oil wells and all kinds of things that pilots have to know about. And you just call up this agency in Washington and order them. They're big, and every part of the Earth has been mapped this way. And I had a little catalog, and I would order number 3, 4, 5A or something, and then I would paint it. So I'll just show you some of them. That's moving in on it. And I also painted some upside down, some sideways, some right side up, as if you were in an airplane and you were going through and you tilted and you were over the land. And that's the final section which slides into place. And that was the hardest thing to figure out, how we were going to make a door, but it works really well. So that's the inside. And I'm moving you in closer. And so you see all those marks from the tactical pilotage chart. That's technical information for flying. Okay, then I made these 2 pieces, which are a pair. They're 8 feet tall and 16 feet long, but basically it's 12 shaped canvases that are just hanging side by side. And in the books on globes and maps, you always see these, you maybe have seen these, they're called gores. And for the old maps, they would do it this way, and they'd cut it up and then they'd put it over the globe and glue it down. And that interested me, and I sort of liked the idea. I really wanted to be back on a flat surface. So I thought about the globe sort of flattened against the wall. And I wanted to do a piece. This piece is called Spheres of Influence. And there was, when I was at the American Academy, there was a geographer there who was working on an atlas of the ancient world, had been working on it for 10 years with 90 cartographers and geographers all over the world. And so they mapped different parts of the ancient world, which was mostly around the Mediterranean. And I bought it when it came out, and I wanted to use it as the basis for this piece. And I thought it would be continuous, but there was too much water, so I took certain sections. It starts in the Middle East, and it comes through Sinai and parts of North Africa and parts of Europe. It ends with the tip of Italy. So there's Mediterranean moving through it. And again, I used contemporary tactical pilotage charts over the first layer, which is from these ancient maps. And the interesting thing was that the most densely populated places and cities are the same now as they were then. Contested areas are the same now as they were then. So this is Israel and Palestine. And this is Greece and Turkey. And these little notations are from those charts. And so this is the pair. In Italy, which I guess you've probably gathered by now, I've spent a lot of time in that country. In the Renaissance palaces, there's always a library. And in the library, there are two really big globes, the celestial globe and the terrestrial globe. So that's what I wanted to do with these two pieces. One was of the sky and one was of the earth. This is called Dark and Light Continents. This image circulated on the internet. It's a satellite photograph of the Earth at night. And it's a little hard to see in this slide, but it indicates which parts of the Earth are brightly lit and which are darker. And then over it is a chart of the night sky with the constellations from 1600. And I didn't put in the animals, you know, the bears and the dippers and things, but it is an accurate copy of this map of the night sky. So my idea was that you'd be up in the sky looking down through the stars onto the Earth. Okay, so that's the most brightly lit country. And that's the most dark part of the Earth.
Do you know what time of year these constellations were taken from?
No.
I was just wondering because it changes.
Yeah, I know that. I did, but I don't remember. There's a lot of stuff I don't remember. Anyway, then this piece was done during the invasion of Iraq. It's called Rocking the Cradle. And every day the New York Times had a map of the troop movements as they got closer and closer to Baghdad for 10 days. And as I knew this invasion was coming, I planned the piece beforehand. So this is from that same book of the ancient world. And this is a map of ancient Mesopotamia on the inside of this cradle. And the cradle is too big for a baby, but too small for an adult. It's about 4 feet long. And I urge people to rock it. Nobody ever wants to interact with my art, but I am always asking them to. And I'll just show you a detail of it. This is the last piece of public art I'm showing you. This is in Japan in a cultural center in the city called Kuriyoshi. And it's, because I just wanted to show it because I did, during those years when I was doing mostly public art, about half of them were hand-painted ceramic tiles, like the Mankato piece, and about half of them were glass or tile mosaic that I worked with mosaicists on. And this one was done with a Japanese mosaicist. And we communicate with each other because he was trained in Italy, and that we were kind of on the same level. That was really the only other language I could speak in and the only other language he could speak in. But it's looking very bleached out to me, but these are, the architect sent me from Japan lots of old maps of that area, and they wanted, that's what they wanted. And I started to think about a kind of crazy quilt kimono with a juxtaposition of different textiles. And so this is a combination of these old maps plus textile patterns from that region. And it was done, the maps are done in mosaic, which is cut up pieces of natural stone, and the textile patterns were sandblasted marble. So it's just one sheet and sandblasted out. It's much quicker to do. And I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that. I had originally thought about doing the whole thing in mosaic, but there wasn't either the time or the money for that. But in the end, I liked the juxtaposition of the two different things. Okay, this series, which is from, I think I finished it in 2006, we're getting closer to the present. It's called American History, and there are 9 images. It's a very quirky history of America, and it's a lot of my stuff that I'm recycling and collaging and found stuff. So this is the first one, The Age of Discovery. And this is the second one, which is called Popular Uprisings. And it was supposed to be about the American Revolutionary War with the British, but I started introducing motifs from Chiapas because I went down there. There was this popular uprising there in the 1990s. So it's a mixture. And then, so that's a detail of it. And actually, these 3 in the center, which I called Sing-Along American History with the music in them, originally I was only making those 3. And then I wanted to move back in time and forward in time, and I ended up with 9. But my mother gave me this, my mother's 94 now. She gave me these game boards, and they had maps on them from her childhood. And they had these songs, these kind of about the myths of America, this Americana and these images. And that really was the basis for all of this. So this one is called Sing-Along American History, White Bread. And this is like European immigrants to America and their music and their culture. I don't know if this is even visible back there. One's called Cowboys and Indians. This is about all the myths and music associated with the West, the expansion to the West. And that's a detail. Yeah, with my work, it really helps to have details. And then this one is called War and Race. This is about the South and the Civil War, pretty much. And then this is called Wars in Old Europe. I don't know if you remember, our President Bush referred to Old Europe, and at that moment that term was around. But this is really mostly about World War I. We're moving closer to the present. So I have these medieval European cities, but I use children's war toys. I've used them a lot in work that I'm not showing. Particularly Warhammer. Some of you might know about it. I go to the Warhammer store, and there are all these 12 and 13-year-old boys and me. So these soldiers with the big guns are from Warhammer. And that's a detail. And then this one, Nuking the Japs. This is about World War II. And these scary science fiction-y characters come from Warhammer also. And the maps are maps that I used when I did that piece, the floor piece in Japan. And Japanese maps have a whole different kind of look to them from European maps. Very beautiful, actually. Those little red nobules, the names of places go in them. Okay, now we're through with Sing-Along American History. This is called 21st Century Crusades. This is about the Middle East. I have Muslim, Christian, and Hebrew images and lettering in this one. And then the last one, Going Global. Again, these are all children's war toys. And it started with a map that was in the New York Times showing in red all the countries that had terrorist attacks. And then I found this other map of cities of the world with big skyscrapers, which I consider targets, and I just put them all over. But I don't have a detail of that. Oh, I do have a detail of that. Okay. So then now we're done with that series. And then now these things are bits and pieces of things that are going to add up to the installation that Joan was talking about in Venice. So we're getting closer to the present. These are woodblock prints that are 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And I did them on the island of Maui with a woodblock printer off one of the Hawaiian islands. And it's on very thin rice paper, and the light comes through it when you hang it. And the water in the background is like the conventions for water in old maps. They always make it like that. And that's a detail. And then I went back the next year and I did another series called Kaho'olawe, which is another Hawaiian island. And there are 10 in this series. Same thing. The images are all of Kaho'olawe, but they're printed in different colors. And I cut more woodblock prints that time, so there's more differences in the imagery. But it's the same island. And then I also made this etching, which I'll show you, of the island, which is glued, shinkoleed onto the print. Kaho'olawe is a small island off the coast of Maui, and if you're on Maui, you can always see it in the distance. And it was a sacred site of the Hawaiian people, but in the 20th century, it was used by the U.S. Navy as a bombing range for tests. And now it's been given back to the Hawaiian people. And a group of people go out there in a boat every week, and they're working on cleaning it up. They have to clean up the ordnance and replant it, and it will be habitable in 100 years. But anyway, so that's the story of Kaho'olawe. And I drew it from Maui on an etching plate, and we made the etching, and that's a tactical piloted chart of it. Okay, then I'm making all these different pieces for this installation in Venice, and it had to do with islands. Everything, Venice is an island. I live on the island of Manhattan. That first part was done on the island of Maui. So for Venice, I bought these paper pulp masks, which if you go to Venice, they're sold to tourists, and the Venetians hate them, loathe them. They're tourist kitsch, they're everywhere. And they have these traditional carnival characters on them. And I found people who made them, and I just bought them plain to paint. And I painted islands on each of them. I painted 65 of them to fit in the panes of the windows in this space so the light would come through their eyes. That's Australia. I'm just going to show you a few of them. And that is the Venetian fleet on the way to Constantinople. And this is Java. Now, this is the space where I installed them. You see the hanging woodblock prints, and there's another group of hanging pieces that I'll show you. And it's a huge space. It was a formidable space, and I tried to make a lot of stuff to fill it up. I don't actually think I succeeded. Some friends suggested to me that maybe I should have created a smaller space inside the space, because the ceilings are 40 feet high and it's, I don't know, 160 feet long or something. So for my kind of work, which was essentially intimate, I had to like amp it up for this space. And I brought targets with me, and I called the installation Voyages and Targets. And I made these hanging pieces. There were no white walls there. There was no gallery lighting, so the light depended on what the light was like outside. And you couldn't even put anything against the brick walls because there was too much moisture. That's the water, the canal right behind you there. So I put the masks in the windows, and when the light came through, it worked, and when the light didn't come through, it didn't work. But the hanging pieces were collages I had done that I mounted on canvas. They're 13 feet high, and they're away from the wall. And they have carnival. I got very interested in the history of carnival in Venice, which is what the masks are in the studio. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you how I adapted these pieces to a New York gallery. And it was just had to be very different. And so there weren't any windows, so I made these boxes. And that's how I've shown them since. And there's a few more. That's the island of Lesbos. And that's the Melville Island. This is Japan. And then this, I have to correct this, I'm sorry. This is recent work. These are tondos, round paintings, and these are 60 inches in diameter. And it's called the Moments and Hours and Days of Our Life. And what it is I took these charts of the sky from 1600, and over it are the tracks of satellites in space off the internet. And I've just been interested in this idea of future wars in space and what it means to have all these things going around up there. So here's a detail of that. And I use those star stickers you get from the stationery store a lot. This one is called Helium on the Moon, because somebody told me that we're going to fight future wars over the helium on the moon. But the imagery is like all of these patriarchs from the Bible. And this one is called The Days, it's backwards, The Days and Hours and Moments of Our Lives. And you know what happens when I'm working on something and people come into my studio, they always say, stop, stop, stop. It's been that way all my life. And a lot of people don't like color. And so they see something drawn and they like it better and they tell me to stop. So this time I just stopped. And this one, which I just finished this year, I visited, I was teaching at MICA in Baltimore, and my TA's husband was an astronomer at the Hubble at Johns Hopkins, and I went there and he gave me these photographs, and I got very interested in the idea of incorporating these galaxies. I have beautiful photographs of the galaxies into my painting. So this is called Eye of God, which is the name of the galaxy. And this piece, which I just finished in September, each one of these is 6 feet square, and it's called The Middle East, Three Views. And it's a combination of maps from different periods of the Middle East and 3 different galaxies. So this one is of an ancient Roman map of the Middle East with the kind of conventions for mountains and water that were done in those days. And this is the Pinwheel Galaxy. And that's a detail. It's acrylic on canvas again. And this one, This is a map from the Cold War period. You see the USSR, the names of the countries have all changed in that part of the world. This is a map of the Middle East as seen from Israel. And that is the Sombrero Galaxy. And this one, this map was in the New York Times this summer. It has to do with the war in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And this was also in the New York Times and widely circulated on the internet. This is a slide from a US military PowerPoint presentation that the generals present to explain the war in Afghanistan. But according to the article in the New York Times, they don't understand it. Nobody understands it. So this is a detail of it. And this is the end, except we're going to try and show you my... This is a painting. It's 96 inches in diameter, and it's called Revolver, and it turns. And I thought I had put a little video in of it turning into this presentation, but you'll just have to use your imagination. It's got star charts. 2 of them are Arabic and 2 of them are Chinese. And because I'd used those European star charts so many times, I started looking for other kinds of star charts. And then out of the skies are these monsters from the children's war toys, from Warhammer. That's a detail. Can you see that monster? That's a detail. And this is my last image.
I know we started a little late, but Joyce is willing to take a
Sure.
few questions and answers, or she's not probably going to take any answers.
I'm going to sit down, though.
Probably going to give you some answers. So, I have a question. What's that freeze stuff?
What?
How do you do that?
Do what?
Freeze. Making the freeze? Yeah. Fresco, sorry.
Oh, fresco. How do you do fresco? Sorry. It's a traditional art form which goes back to ancient times. And what I like about fresco, except that it's usually done on a wall. So it's not a picture that you hang on the wall. It is the wall. And I love that. It's a real craft. You put the plaster on over several days in several layers. And the final layer is the one that you paint into, and you have to paint into it within a certain time period. You have to wait. You can't paint on it when it's too wet, so you have to wait till it gets a little bit drier, but it's still moist, and then you can paint on it, I don't know, for 4 or 5 hours, depending on the moisture in the air that day, until it starts to get too dry. And that's the challenge of it. And if you go to countries where there are a lot of frescoes, and there are different fresco traditions in different cultures, and you look closely, you see the section that's done per day. The word, a lot of language for art is Italian. So the word for 1 day's work in fresco is una giornata, which means 1 day's work. And usually, like in Renaissance frescoes, the day will be like the edge of a body, usually. You'll see it. And you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. And then the next one is around another body. And so that's the amount that you can paint. And the more skilled the artist is in fresco, and the more time that artist has done it, the more they can cope with in the course of a day. I mean, there was a great tradition of fresco painting in Mexico in the 20th century.
Now, with the Michelangelo and Giotto, you can see the joints. But
Yes.
I didn't see any joints in yours.
Well,
so
because
you
they're
were
only
doing
8 by
all
10
of-
inches.
Yeah, I know, but you were doing all of it.
Yeah, each one was 1 day's work.
They're
And there's some tricks you can do, you know, that I learned, like you can you can spray it like if you're spraying plants to keep it moist, or put a wet towel over it and it extends the time a little bit, but there's a finite number of hours you can work on it.
And
Let's
what were they
move
on?
on, there are lots of questions.
Oh,
Yes.
How long, this is sort of a dual question. Do you work on more than one piece at a time ever?
sometimes.
How long do you spend, like what's the shortest amount of time or the longest amount of time you spend on these?
Small globes there. I didn't show you a series that I had a show in New York last month. I had a series of 9 small paintings that I didn't put in the PowerPoint, called Silk Route, and I began that series in 1998. They're all different sizes, but they go together on a wall, and they're different sections of the Silk Route in Asia. And I did the paintings in 1998 from maps of different sections of the Silk Route, and I used some of my old lithographs to build up the mountains and suggest the traditional textiles of the region. But it wasn't a very exciting body of work, so it went into my storage. Then I took it out in 2001, and I decided it needed another layer. Just see, usually for me, the way I just keep adding. And so I added to them copied some old map about that region. Usually they were Indian or Chinese, depending on which piece of the Silk Road it was. And then it still didn't work, so it went back in my storage. And so this year I took it out, and I did this series called China is Near, which also I didn't show, but the book is back there, which is about the Silk Route. And I used a lot of kitsch from Chinatown in it. And it's sort of, I started thinking about the Silk Route of today, all the merchandise coming to us from China. And so then I added to these paintings some of that Chinatown kitsch. And finally, I showed it. So, but that's unusual. I mean, I don't usually work 12 years on something, and I didn't work on it continuously for 12 years. But I don't know. I don't know.
Continuing the working process, first, thank you for this really beautiful and rich array of work that you've shown us. And you describe part of your working process, but how do you, and you just mentioned that you keep adding things, but visualizing the structure of your pieces, do you, how do you do that? Do you have the plan in mind as you're working on the detail? Do you have a plan?
Yeah. Yeah, I usually draw it. But then, you know, then I add things to it later.
I just wanted to toss one thing out. Several people from my class making media for democracy. Almost everyone's here. And one of the reasons I wanted Joyce to come was to talk to that class today. And it's because over the years, not only has Joyce made these incredibly detailed series of paintings, but she's had this parallel life as an activist in many different forms of activism, like media drops from the U.S. From the office building, the congressional office building, where she wrapped things around her body and went in through all the checkpoints and sat and had lunch at the cafeteria, and then they go over the edge and drop these huge
Banners.
What are they called?
Banners.
Yeah, they're these big banners talking about, say, the war in Afghanistan. So I thought I might ask you, people often think of political art as being, like socialist realism, pictures of, coal miners going, down with the boss. And certainly this is, for me, very political artwork. So
Yeah, this is a question I always get. And it's been a big problem for me because people do expect political art to be black and white and very sober, even grim, and that's not what I do. So I think that very often the content is not I mean, if I stand there and explain it like I did today, people know what the content is. But a lot of times people will just get the overall feel of something and they won't see the content. And I don't know, you know, I mean, I don't know if this is criticism, if it's a problem. It's like, I don't know how to change the sensibility that I have. It comes out in this form.
Wouldn't want you to.
There were other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I want to ask something to the library, please.
Yeah.
The art piece. You said you painted like all these maps out of like travel books, guidebooks, right? But they were like really interpretive, actually, like interpreting the areas and space and so on. I think that's a good idea, actually.
I don't know. You know, I approach the public art differently than private work. And in the public art, you have a much larger audience than you have, much broader audience that you have for work that is shown in galleries and museums. And I really wanted to communicate in those public art pieces. But I didn't want to pander. You know, I really wanted to reach out to people and show them some things that might be familiar to them, but maybe in a different way. And I don't know. I mean, I'm getting some distance from the period in which I was doing that work, and I don't feel so close to it. And I think I look at them now, and some of them seem more successful to me than others. I don't know.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm really curious about the ideas or impulses behind inverting the globe. And the reason why I'm curious is I've always looked at maps as representations or lines of colonial power, which also function as instruments or tools for that colonial power. So when you look at a map and you're positioned above it, that's sort of a demonstration of that power. So I'm seeing a turning of the world on its head in a way in the globe, but I would like to hear maybe what intuition or what idea created that inverted.
That, I think, is a mystery to me. I mean, I always knew it had to be the painting had to be on the inside. I don't know why. I mean, I thought about it for a long time before I did it, and it was always the painting had to be on the inside. And in fact, what happened is I was very lucky to have the fellowship to go to the American Academy in Rome for a year. And I had this beautiful big studio with really high ceilings and a skylight and a view of the whole city. And I was making these little globes in this one corner. And I felt like, how am I going to justify having this big space? And I had this idea for the big globe. And it was inspired partly by the Pantheon and the big building with the hole at the top with the light coming through, which I think is just for me like the greatest building I've ever been in, and also other domes in Rome. But I'm not a sculptor, and I didn't know how to make something like that. And I kept talking about it, and then I remember very distinctly one of my fellows who was an architect said to me, well, why don't you stop talking about it and just do it? And I was scared, you know, I didn't know how to do it, and I had to ask around to find the carpenters. And I think there's something female about the idea that it wasn't even an idea, the emotional feeling that it had to be painted on the inside. But I'm not sure, you know. And I didn't want to even paint, I mean, it's just raw wood on the outside. I wasn't really interested in putting anything on the outside. And this couple that I worked with who are falegnami, who are carpenters, really they're woodworkers, they're very good craftsmen. And her degree is in industrial design and his is in painting. And she figured out how to engineer it. And she did the technical drawings. And he figured out how to build it. And I loved these people, and we had incredibly engaging conversations all the way through. And then the whole thing was, what were we going to do for the door? And so if you think about it, you have this curved thing. You couldn't have the door come up, and you couldn't have it come over. And we were getting closer and closer to the deadline. There had to be a show at the end of the year. like you have your shows at the end of the year. And we didn't have an idea for the door. And every time I'd go down there, the same conversation, La Porta, La Porta. And nobody knew what to do. And it was this conversation piece in the neighborhood. It was a little tiny shop and low ceilings and dark. And that's why it was done in, if you may have noticed, in two sections, because the ceiling wasn't high enough to do the whole thing. Different people in the neighborhood would come in and look at its development and schmooze and stuff. And there was one guy who was always coming in who was a doctor. There was an emergency room hospital up the block, but he built boats on the weekend. And one day he came in and said, put it on wheels. And that's what we did. It just wheels in and wheels out.
Thank you.